Welcome to my mid-season mock draft. You know, I don't know what's worse, having a crappy team during these crappy times, or having a good team and feeling like the entire season could fall off a cliff due to the amount of injuries this year, or COVID shutting us down right before the Super Bowl. I know one good thing about my team sucking this year is that I've already gotten a chance to now turn my attention towards the 2021 NFL Draft. If this is your first time seeing one of my mock drafts, thank you so much for clicking on this video. I'm glad to have you. This is my favorite thing to do on this channel, so hopefully by the end of this video, you'll decide to stick around and subscribe to the channel. Because this is my first mock draft of the season, I would love for you guys to name a prospect and a game of theirs that you think that I need to watch, preferably one from 2020. I haven't been able to watch as much live college football this year as I'd like, but let me know a guy that you're a really big fan of that you don't think is getting enough attention. For the people with a short attention span, I'm going to jump right into the first couple of picks here. The timestamps are in the description and the pinned comment, so if you want to jump around, you can do that. But after the first couple picks, I'll take a break and describe my thought process when making these picks, determining the order of the draft, and so on and so forth. So let's get into the first overall pick. The New York Jets are on the clock. It's amazing how the Kyler Murray, Josh Rosen situation has numbed us all to any controversy with the Jets taking Trevor Lawrence here at number 1. If that hadn't just happened, then I think there'd be about a 50-50 split here on whether or not the Jets should trade down here and build something around Sam Darnold. And honestly, if it were any other year or any other quarterback prospect than Trevor Lawrence, I'd be on the side suggesting a trade down. I was and still am a fan of Sam Darnold, no matter how dorky he seems now as an NFL quarterback. If he can embrace his inner Ghostbuster on a new team with a better coach and supporting cast, he could go and have a much better career than Josh Rosen has had thus far, at least, who I think has been royally screwed by 2 NFL franchises. But you just can't pass on Trevor Lawrence, who seems like he'd be a much more natural fit in New York than Darnold anyways. They'll likely get a new head coach and offensive coordinator that are hired with Trevor Lawrence in mind. This should foster a much more successful environment for him, and this one feels kind of like a lock already, similarly to the way that Joe Burrow was locked into the Bengals before Thanksgiving last year. At number 2, I've got the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they've had multiple first-round picks in this draft thanks to the Jalen Ramsey trade, and this is their chance to turn this franchise around. Minshew Mania will always have a special place in my heart, and it'll go right on the old shelf of memories next to Tebow time, but he was a flash in the pan and just doesn't have the consistency to be a full-time starter in the NFL, and I wouldn't be surprised if he got traded to another team this offseason. Jake Luton or Luton, this guy's so irrelevant, I can't even remember how to pronounce his name. He's not much better and could provide the Jaguars with a bridge quarterback going into 2021, maybe a long-term backup, but they've got to go quarterback here, right? And Justin Fields almost didn't get a chance to prove himself again in 2020, but once the Big Ten kicked things off, he hit the ground running, solidifying himself as the number 2 quarterback in this class. His athleticism paired with his passing ability fits the future mold, or I guess the current mold now, for an NFL quarterback. It's looking very likely to be another year where you've got 2 quarterback prospects that are likely to be locks in the first 2 picks of the draft. If you look back at other years where this has happened, the chance of success is probably not where you'd hope. But Trevor Lawrence is a better prospect than any of those classes, and Justin Fields is just a different cat altogether, but we'll see. The Jets and Jaguars are franchises that are infamous for their dysfunction, so if these two end up playing for these 2 teams and fail, I'm calling it now. The fault should land with the franchise. At number 3, we've got the New York Giants. First, let me pose a question. Is Dave Gettleman's job safe? Because him being retained factors highly into the direction the Giants are going to go, but people are losing patience with the lack of development from Daniel Jones, and unfortunately for Gettleman, he's kind of tied to the success of the quarterback that he invested such a high pick in. It's kind of an occupational hazard for NFL GMs. I'm not ready to pull the plug on Daniel Jones' experience just yet, and with the way that this mock draft plays out in this scenario, they've missed out on the top 2 quarterbacks anyways. If you're giving Daniel Jones a 3rd year to prove himself, you might as well get the guy some more protection. Taking another offensive lineman this early feels redundant a year after Andrew Thomas was the pick, but much like the Saquon pick, Oregon's Penei Sewell is the best player available. He is a Samoan Quentin Nelson that will elevate the entire offensive line regardless of where you play him. For the sake of time, I won't get too much into detail about this in this video because I'm sure that we'll be talking about this scenario many more times as we get closer to the draft, but there are quite a few directions the Giants could go with their offensive line moving forward. I've personally been trying to mock them a linebacker for years, so Micah Parsons is who I would take here, but some teams refuse to invest in 3-down linebackers or coverage safeties, despite tight ends getting faster and wide receivers getting bigger every year. At number 4, we've got the Washington football team, and I think that they need to draft themselves a new mascot, to be honest. I mean that facetiously, but assuming that they establish a new identity before the draft, the first player that they take will be somewhat the face of the franchise, especially if it's a quarterback. Benching Dwayne Haskins and not looking back does help avoid the Josh Rosen situation during the offseason, but I'm pretty disappointed that this guy didn't really get a fair shot in the same way I was frustrated for Josh Rosen. This football team would be fortunate if it works out for them as well as it worked out for the Cardinals, but the karma floating around this organization is not not so good. The next quarterback on my draft board is Trey Lance, who is coming from an FCS school and has essentially missed out on an entire year of football. So to think that he'd be ready to start for an NFL team on day one next season is a little bit naive. It sounds like Ron Rivera would prefer to select a veteran quarterback anyways, so maybe Cam Newton and Rivera can reunite for another season to be the ideal bridge for Trey Lance. Alright, so when making these picks in this mock draft, I like to use a combination of 4 different factors when deciding picks on a team by team or a pick by pick basis. So one of the things is, what would I do? Another thing is what I think that the team should do. The third factor is what I think they would do based on their track records, their trends, things that they've said, whether it be the GM or the owner. And then the final factor, maybe the biggest factor honestly, is the value of the pick or the player at that given position. Also, this draft order is based on my full season projection of the remaining NFL schedule. I've gone back and forth with using Vegas odds or my own, and ultimately I decided I wanted to trigger the mock draft order police. So the complaint section is down below. The comment section is down below. Feel free to submit your complaints there. Also, I checked Football Outsiders DVOA while making one of my pick'em videos, and I noticed that the order of the teams at the bottom was really close to the beginning of my draft order. So I went and I cross-referenced the DVO rankings from Football Outsiders with ESPN's Football Power Index and their projected draft order based on that, and they correlated really nicely. So by all means, go off in the comments about your team getting dunked on in the order, but this is not something where I just threw teams at a wall and called it a day. I take pride in having one of the best mock drafts on the internet. Hopefully you agree. If you do, please show some love hitting that like button or smashing it if that's what the kids are still doing these days. And let's jump right back into this. At number 5, I've got the Dallas Cowboys. If you told me before the season that the Cowboys would be picking in the top 5, I would have told you to stop being a hater, yet here we are. With that said, I also don't think there's any chance the Cowboys will be moving on from Dak Prescott this offseason. But I can tell you that the Cowboys are not taking a tight end in the first round like a certain mock draft has said that they would do. Dalton Schultz was going to be the breakout tight end of the year before Dak went down with an injury, and Blake Jarwin was signed to be the number 1 guy this year, and he'll be back next year ready to go. So just scratch tight end off the draft list altogether. The offensive line is probably going to go through some changes this offseason, as Tyron Smith has just become too injury prone to rely on. He'll probably have to take a pay cut to stick around. Ideally, Penei Sewell would fall to them, but I'm not sure if there's another offensive lineman in this draft worthy of a top 5 pick. Addressing the secondary is also an option for the Cowboys, but Trayvon Diggs flashed in half a season before breaking his foot. I think he's the alpha cornerback for them moving forward. And the young interior defensive line duo of Neville Gallimore and Tristan Hill allows you to pass on a weak defensive tackle class. So it's the inconsistent linebacking core for me. Penn State's linebacker Micah Parsons is a rare prospect at the position and the best defender in this draft class in my opinion. The irony of Jalen Smith saving the Cowboys top 5 pick with his terrible penalties versus the Steelers just so the Cowboys can find his replacement is too perfect for me. This Cowboys defense shouldn't be as bad as it is because it wasn't that long ago that they were one of the best units in the league, but the biggest difference is the play from the linebackers. Jalen Smith was still hungry for that second contract, and Leighton Vander Esch was a healthy rookie, but he's proven to be just a bigger version of Sean Lee now. He's great when he's on the field, but he's just not there enough. At number 6, we've got the Atlanta Falcons. The next best defensive prospect is one with even better positional value and an ideal fit for the Falcons, but who knows what's in store for them schematically as they go through a transition from the front office to the coaching staff. However, if the Falcons don't manage to screw up this draft capital with another late surge of winning meaningless game, Gregory Rousseau should be able to get after the quarterback from even or odd defensive fronts. Rousseau is what the Falcons were hoping they were getting in Takk McKinley, but I think an even more explosive and more disciplined version. He opted out this year due to COVID, and he's going to be a really interesting case study to see how teams view him with that year off. I'll go into more detail about my concerns with this later on with another player that opted out due to COVID. At number 7, we've got the Miami Dolphins, and they are set up so well for the future and could go a multitude of directions in the draft next year. Now they've got a top 10 pick to add to what is already an impressive foundation for Brian Flores thanks to the Texans. They could go best player available early on and grab a wide receiver with the second first rounder, or they could go best player available and wide receiver early on and allow the value to fall to them. Their offensive line is a lot better than anticipated, so they don't have to replace Laramie Tunsil with the pick that they got from the Texans. They've got some young pieces that should only get better with time. So in most scenarios that I've run, LSU's wide receiver Jamar Chase is the best player available almost every single time. Wide receiver isn't a huge need with Devontae Parker, Preston Williams, Jakeem Grant, and don't forget Allen Hurns will be back after opting out this season. But Tua has obvious chemistry with the 2 wide receivers from Alabama that could be available to select with their other first rounder. But even with all of these receiving options, Jamar Chase is just too good to pass up at this point. At number 8, we've got the Bengals, and even though he's been thrown around like a rag doll in his rookie season, Joe Burrow is probably hoping that Jamar Chase falls past the Dolphins in this scenario, and if he does, then I'm sure that Joe Burrow will personally call up the Bengals front office, begging for them to take his college wide receiver. However, the Bengals have to protect their investment and get him some protection. And I always like to be as transparent as possible in my mock drafts. I am not an offensive line expert. There's not a position in which I lean on the opinions of respective scouts on the internet quite like I do with the offensive line. Now, once I'm informed of a top offensive line prospect like Penei Sewell, then I can see the things that scouts are raving about, but I'm not typically looking for good offensive line play. And if you are, you're more of a football dork than I am, so props to you. But I'm going to use this obvious need at offensive lineman to highlight a guy that I really liked last year that doesn't seem to be getting the publicity, and that's Alabama's Alex Leatherwood. I thought he was a first-round pick last year. He came back for another season. He's got similar versatility to Penei Sewell and could play anywhere along the offensive line, although he may be best suited for a move to guard. Don't worry, the next offensive tackle that I have in this mock draft will be the guy that I'm hearing from scouts that will be one of the top offensive linemen in this class and might actually be a better fit for this offensive line in Cincinnati. So before you type a short essay in the comments about the offensive line choice in a November mock draft, stay tuned and see who's up next. At number 9, the San Francisco 49ers are on the clock, and the 49ers finishing with a top 10 pick probably had similar odds to the Cowboys going into the season. They're going to be a tough team to project for because they have so many players returning that we tend to forget about when they spend so much time on the IR. Trent Williams is the only player with an expiring contract that I would be concerned with leaving for a new deal because this would create a massive hole that would shoot up to the biggest need for the 49ers to fill. The secondary was an issue going into the last draft, but I think the 49ers thought they could squeeze another year out of Richard Sherman. That didn't work out, and the 49ers don't have a single cornerback currently under contract next year. Patrick Surtain II is the top cornerback in this draft class, while also fitting the physical mold that Robert Saleh likes for his scheme. John Lynch was at the top of his game at the same time that Surtain's father, Patrick Surtain Sr., was also a Pro Bowl cornerback. Now, I know it's not the same as being classmates at Stanford, but hopefully it still qualifies Surtain to be on the board for the 49ers. At number 10, I've got the Minnesota Vikings. And Mike Zimmer always has had a good defense, but I think that he assumed his track record could overcome the lack of experience in the Vikings secondary, and this position needs to be addressed. Fortunately for him, this 2021 draft class is loaded with cornerback talent, and Caleb Ferry opted out at Virginia Tech and would have been at least a second round pick last year. This is the other guy that I was saying would be an interesting name to watch to see where his stock is at during the draft process. I always say that the over-analysis of the top players going into the season is one of my least favorite parts of the draft process. I always feel like scouts will undervalue guys because they didn't develop from year to year like they did in the NCAA video games. Sometimes the consistency is enough. It's injuries or decline in play that you worry about. I would be more concerned that sophomores in the future could opt out in non-COVID worlds so that they don't hurt their draft stock, which would only hurt the play of college football. At number 11, we've got the Denver Broncos. And John Elway is a tough read for what he's going to do in the draft, but it does seem like he's learned how to attack the top-heavy talent in the draft. For example, taking 2 wide receivers in the first 2 rounds of the loaded wide receiver class of 2020. With almost all of their cornerbacks entering the final year of their contract in 2021, it's time to stock up on youthful talent. Tyson Campbell from Georgia might not even be the best cornerback on his team, but he's one of the more physically gifted players in the draft, and in the AFC West, you're going to need athletes that can match up with Tyreek Hill one week and then Keenan Allen the next. At number 12, we've got the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers got themselves a good one in Justin Herbert, and I debated getting him some more protection, but the Chargers will probably lose Melvin Ingram to free agency this offseason, and Joey Bosa is always getting hurt, so you really need another guy you can rely on. K. Woody Pay is in a similar mold to Bosa, maybe even too similar, but Anthony Lynn needs to survive this season, or else the Chargers might have to change defensive schemes anyways. The Michigan Wolverines lost edge rusher Aiden Hutchinson for the season, so we'll have to see if that's an impact on the production from Pay, but this defense really needs to be able to slow guys down when Justin Herbert's putting 35 on the board and still losing games. Moving on to number 13, we've got the Detroit Lions. And the Lions also have to get out of this lower middle tier purgatory at some point, right? I think it's time to just blow the whole thing up. Fire the coach and consider trading the quarterback. I'm sorry, Detroit. I know you guys absolutely love Matthew Stafford, but I think you got to move on while you still can get something for him. And if you truly love him, then you got to let him go.
Only know you love her when you let her go. And you let her go.
Give the guy a chance to thrive somewhere else before his career comes to an end. There's going to be quite a few teams that could be looking for a veteran quarterback next year, and the Lions can save $20 million on the cap next year with a post-June 1st trade. Otherwise, he is going to be a $34 million cap hit for the Lions in 2021. Even if ownership can't part with Stafford and they would rather force him into an early retirement than make the playoffs, his contract opens up the door for the Lions to let a quarterback fall to them in the draft so that he can sit behind Stafford until he's ready. Zach Wilson from BYU is the quarterback riser of the year. He's come out of nowhere and was the reason I delayed this mock because I realized his ascension was already too great to ignore. He could potentially rise even higher than this, but this is going to be a tough class to crack into the top 3 in my opinion. The Lions could say F it. We're going to try and take a run with Stafford, get him another wide receiver with Marvin Jones set to be a free agent, but I just don't see that ending up well. At number 14, we've got the New England Patriots. Zach Wilson will be a popular pick here for mock drafts, and it does seem like a safe floor at this point in the process, but Bill Belichick is damn near impossible to predict in these drafts, so I'm getting a weapon for whomever ends up as the starting quarterback in 2021 for the Patriots. Florida tight end Kyle Pitts isn't just a weapon for this offense. This man is a chess piece that can cause all kinds of problems as a mismatch. Every time the Patriots dynasty had a top offense, they got a lot of production out of those tight ends. Mind you, they also had Tom Brady and Gronk though, so maybe the other tight ends had nothing to do with it, but I digress. The versatility that Pitts would bring to an offense is definitely right up Bill Belichick's alley. Honestly though, if Kyle Pitts comes out and has a Vernon Davis-like NFL combine, he might not even make it to the teens. At number 15, we've got the Miami Dolphins back on the clock, and those Alabama wide receivers are still there. Obviously, you're not going to take 2 first-round wide receivers, but it will be one of those decisions you might question in hindsight on draft night if it plays out like this. But now I've got the Dolphins taking a pass rusher, linebacker, hybrid player, because this is a position that's been critical in the New England version of this scheme, and was so important that Brian Flores had to bring Kyle Van Noy down to Miami to be a part of his defense. There's actually quite a few of these guys in this class, but I think that the local guy, Quincy Roche, could be the best option to stand up on occasion, and with COVID reducing travel, might be easier for the Miami scouts to actually go and see play. At 16, we've got the Carolina Panthers, and the Panthers picking in the middle of the first is a big difference from where I had them picking in my way too early mock draft right after the 2020 draft. The coaches down there, Matt Rule and Joe Brady, are doing something right, and with Teddy Bridgewater, Philip Walker, and Will Grier under contract for another year or two, I don't think this team needs to worry about finding a future franchise quarterback just yet, and worry more about building a foundation that can have a young quarterback come in a year or two from now with a very deep squad around him. Starting with the reconstruction of this offensive line, I think the Russell Okung experiment was only meant for clearing up some cap space, so he probably won't be coming back, which clears $13 million off the cap. Now they need a franchise left tackle. I did say the next offensive lineman in this mock was going to be the quick riser that you might not have heard about just yet, and Virginia Tech's Christian Darrisaw is the offensive tackle flavor of the year. Dane Brugler, now with the Athletic, is probably my favorite draft scout out there right now, and he started hyping this guy up in October, and people are starting to catch on. He's got the prototypical size and athleticism for the position, and another guy whose college is in close proximity to the team scouting him. At number 17, I've got the Chicago Bears, and they could be in the market for drafting a quarterback, or they could avoid screwing that up again and be in the veteran quarterback market. Maybe they right the wrong of passing on Cam Newton this year and give him a shot next year. His play style is a much better fit for the way the Bears are built to win right now with defense, and I think Chicago media would be a little bit more understanding of the terrible throws that he has on occasion because he'd be so much better to cover than Jay Cutler or Mitch Trubisky. But I'll save all that for an off-season review video for the Bears. I obviously don't think the quarterback is the way to go in the middle of the first, but I mentioned this in my way too early mock, and Bears fans were so mad, but Allen Robinson is not coming back to Chicago. He's going to sign with a wide receiver needy team with a veteran quarterback. He wants to win, and he's running out of time. Anthony Miller never developed the way that I thought he would, and only has a year left on his contract, so wide receiver is looking like a glaring need in 2021. Jalen Waddle would have been the easy pick here for me, but with his ankle injury on the opening kickoff robbing him of the season, I don't even know if he's going to be in this draft class, let alone a first rounder based on his 2019 season. His teammate, however, Devontae Smith, has been ridiculously productive wide receiver with multiple quarterbacks at Alabama, and he might end up being a better wide receiver in the NFL than Waddle anyways. At number 18, we've got the Las Vegas Raiders. Mike Mayock and John Gruden have shown their style in a short time, and they are low-key predictable. They want a highly recruited prospect from a Power 5 conference, preferably a big-time football school. For the Raiders, the defensive tackle position has been somewhat of a black hole for them, especially after Mo Hurst seemed so promising as a rookie. His contract only has a year left, while free agent addition Malik Collins and John Hankins have expiring contracts. I think they have to address this position in the draft, and it's not the 3 technique that's the biggest problem, it's the 1 technique, and that's Jonathan Hankins. So in the mold of Hankins, Jordan Davis from Georgia checks all the boxes that the Raiders look for in a first round prospect. He's an absolute mammoth of a man, could make the entire defense better by collapsing the pocket on first and second down and shoring up this run deep. At number 19, we've got the Philadelphia Eagles. And while I was making this draft, I had to check the draft order because this is typically not a playoff position, but with the increase in playoff berths this year, the Eagles could win the division with 7 or 8 wins and still pick in the late teens. But as far as this roster goes, I don't even know what the plan is on offense with these 2 quarterbacks, so I think I'm going to avoid that side of the ball altogether with these first round mocks. Also, they just added a wide receiver in the first last year, and the offensive line has Andre Dillard coming back next year. And then on defense, Eagles fans remind me every year that they don't value linebackers despite their linebacker linebackers being terrible. So fine, I'll turn my attention to the secondary, which has been needing some help for a while. Darius Slay and Avonte Maddox are the only cornerbacks under contract beyond this year. So let's grab them another one of these guys. I'm gonna get cute here because it actually does make sense. Asante Samuel Jr., the second cornerback with a former All-Pro for a father and former Philadelphia Eagle. This is just too perfect of a fit right now. But wait, there's more. If you hit that like button in the next 60 seconds, I'll throw in another father-son combo just as good as this one coming up. At number 20, we've got the Cleveland Browns on the clock, and their secondary needs help. But the LSU guys, Grant Delpit and Greedy Williams, should be able to get healthy in return for 2021. That's going to be a big boost to this defense. Olivier Vernon has been okay, but he probably won't be re-signed because he hasn't been the running mate to Myles Garrett that the Browns are probably looking for. I think they need someone who is a little closer to the level of athleticism of Myles Garrett, if that even exists. Jason Owa from Penn State is a raw freak and could cause problems across from Garrett when both pin their ears back to rush the passer, but he's definitely not the run stopper that Olivier Vernon is. Adrian Claiborne has another year on his deal and could step into that role until the young pass rusher is developed in the run game. But you're going to need athletes to chase down these quarterbacks in the AFC North. At 21, we've got the Jacksonville Jaguars back on the clock after landing Justin Fields with the second overall pick. Some of you may remember how much I like to pair a first-round quarterback with a new offensive tackle. The Jaguars might need one if they let Cam Robinson walk in free agency. They were projected to have a ton of cap space though, so assuming that doesn't change drastically due to the loss of profits from COVID, keeping fans out of the stadium, they should be able to bring him back, giving them a pretty solid offensive line when everyone's healthy. This was actually one of the harder picks of the mock, to be honest. I settled on taking Ohio State cornerback Shaun Wade to pair with last year's first-rounder CJ Henderson. This would be a good fit with Henderson, specializing as a boundary corner while Wade looks the best to be suited in the slot, but he still has the chance to develop as an outside cornerback with the size and the frame for it. At 22, we've got the Indianapolis Colts, and who knows what the plan is for the Colts beyond Phillip Rivers. I could see them trying to plug the hole at quarterback once again, waiting to see if Jacob Eason can get ready to be the guy eventually. The secondary could use some help, but the young safeties are playing well and making up from Malik Hooker, who has been a severe disappointment due to the inability to stay healthy. So with the contract of Justin Houston expiring, I added Carlos Basham Jr. out of Wake Forest to complement former second-round pick Ben Banogu, however you pronounce that. What Banogu lacks in technique, he makes up for in athleticism, while Carlos Basham is the exact opposite. He's not that explosive an athlete, but he's strong and more of a technician. At 23, I have the Buffalo Bills, and they've been looking for a cornerback opposite of Tre'Davious White for far too long. They tried a Band-Aid in Josh Norman, and he's been serviceable, but it's time to stop messing around, get a guy that can do it longer than on a week-to-week basis. Stanford cornerback Paulson Adebo was one of the guys that should have come out last year. He's perfect as an outside cornerback, has a lot of experience as a starter. This was kind of an easy one for me. At 24, I've got the Green Bay Packers on the clock, and if the Packers are going to be stubborn and not take a wide receiver in a loaded wide receiver class, then I'm not going to give them one in a much weaker wide receiver class. Also, don't forget that Devin Funchess opted out from COVID and is still under contract for 2021, so let's build a wall for Aaron Rodgers, sorry. This offensive line has a lot of money wrapped up in some good offensive linemen and some not so good offensive linemen. David Bakhtiari and Corey Linsley are both set to be free agents this year, so with the Packers being kind of cap strapped, if you could only keep one, it's got to be Bakhtiari, right? Elkton Jenkins could play center, but that would just create another hole along the interior of the offensive line. Oklahoma's Creed Humphrey is yet another fave of mine from the 2019 draft that I thought would have declared last year. He would give them a cheaper alternative to re-signing Linsley while building a solid young interior for Jordan Love to eventually play behind. At number 25, the Arizona Cardinals are on the clock, and their offense is rolling. Kyler Murray's making the offensive line look a lot better, but it's the defense, especially the pass rush, that needs help. Chandler Jones has been greatly missed since going on IR, and the sad reality is that he's getting up there in age, and this might happen again next year, which is the final year of his contract. Joseph Osai is one of the risers of 2020 and would be a great scheme fit for the Cardinals defense. Osai and Isaiah Simmons would give the Cardinals a dynamic duo to build their linebacker core around that unbelievably would match the level of athleticism that their quarterback plays with. 26, we've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I think that Tom Brady is going to retire at the end of the season, especially if he eclipses Drew Brees for at least some of these passing records that they keep going back and forth on. If that happens, I question if Bruce Arians will want to try and develop a rookie quarterback after having Tom Brady. They could try the veteran route. Maybe Jimmy Garoppolo can be the heir to Tom Brady after all, or maybe the Bucs win the Super Bowl and Brady and Bruce Arians decide to both retire and the Bucs are forced to start all over anyways. Who knows? There's still a lot of football left, but I just felt like Kyle Trask deserved to be in this mock draft draft, and the Bucs would be a great landing spot for any rookie quarterback, but I don't feel super great about this one. At number 27, the Baltimore Ravens are up, and they are one of my favorite teams to watch their approach to team building. The pass rush has been a need of theirs going into each of the last few off seasons, yet they have acquired a surplus of impact players in the front seven in a variety of ways. The problem is that they've just been using them as band-aids and could potentially still lose Matt Judon, Yannick Ngakoue, Tyus Bowser, Pernell McPhee, all to free agency this offseason. I want them to find a long-term solution. Azeez Ojulari out of Georgia is a 2020 riser with bags of athleticism. He's only a redshirt sophomore, so he could technically go back to school, but athletic pass rushers are such a hot commodity, and he's already getting first-round hype, so why would you go back to school? At number 28, I've got the Tennessee Titans, and they've also really struggled to find a long-term impact player to rush the passer. Harold Landry is only half of the solution, and he needs help. Jadeveon Clowney is still trying to make an impact, and Vic Beasley was a short-lived experiment. So I'm looking at Oregon State's Hamilcar Rashed, who I think is a good scheme fit for them, and is closer to the skill set of Landry than the power rushing style of Clowney. Ultimately, though, for as smart as Titans head coach Mike Vrabel is, his overconfidence that he didn't need a defensive coordinator has likely cost this team dearly, and it speaks volumes that Vrabel can't get production from the very position that he used to play. 29, I've got the New Orleans Saints, and here it is, the other pick I was excited about. The guy here that I have is a Saints legacy player who would fill the need at cornerback while allowing the Saints to move on from Janoris Jenkins and or Patrick Robinson, clearing up some much needed cap space if they want to be able to fit Marshawn Lattimore under the cap in a couple seasons. It is the son of former Saints wide receiver who is responsible for one of the most infamous celebrations in the history of sports, Joe Horn. His son JC has been balling for the Gamecocks, and I need just one of these three cornerback sons to end up on the same team that their dad played on. If they're gonna make me feel old, at least make it nostalgic for me. At number 30, I've got the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Steelers could be a surprise quarterback team late in the first round, but really they can get by with a game manager as long as they maintain that defense and secure some offensive tackles for the future. Andrew Villanueva is set to be a free agent, but I'm sure that he'll be brought back because he's like everything the Steelers want to be known for, right? Army guy, blue collar, hard worker, tough. However, he is getting up there in age, and there's also a big hole at right tackle. Notre Dame's offensive linemen have a really good track record in the NFL, and Liam Eichenberg is the next man up. This guy just looks like an NFL offensive tackle and will be able to play on the right side alongside one of the best guards in the league, David DeCastro. At 31, the New York Jets are back on the clock thanks to that trade of Jamal Adams to the Seahawks, and they should probably be safe here and draft a cornerback, right? But Trevor Lawrence needs some weapons, and why not get his Clemson teammate to bring that winning energy to this offense? Travis Etienne is such an explosive running back and would give this offense the juice it's been missing ever since Adam Gase didn't know how to use Robbie Anderson or Le'Veon Bell. And then at 32, we've got the Kansas City Chiefs back in the 32nd spot because, honestly, who's going to stop them? They were fortunate this year to keep Sammy Watkins at a slight discount, but he's going to have to go rob some other team of a paycheck while he's on the injured reserve for half the season, leaving Tyreek Hill and Mecole Hardman as the only wide receivers under contract. Byron Pringle will probably be bought back at a discount, but I wouldn't be surprised if Demarcus Robinson was lured away by another team at a rate that the Chiefs just don't want to afford. And I don't want to see any of the, Andy Reid doesn't draft wide receivers in the first comments. He showed us last year that he's not afraid to step out of the status quo and keep this offense locked and loaded with talent. I had Jalen Waddle here at first because that would make 3 wide receivers with absolutely blazing speed. But no, give me Rashad Bateman to fill that Sammy Watkins role as the bigger guy. Bateman over Waddle is me trying to keep this a bit more realistic while also thinking outside the box and stacking this offense with really dynamic wide receivers. Andy Reid knows that the offense is his bread and butter, and when you have the best quarterback in the NFL, maybe the most physically gifted ever, you don't force him to get by with one wide receiver. That's right, Green Bay, you heard me right. That's going to do it for this mock draft. I hope you enjoyed. Please remember to hit that like button and subscribe on your way out. Check out my weekly pick'em video for this week when you're done goofing off in the comments of this video. The YouTube algorithm really likes it when you watch multiple videos from the same channel. So I appreciate you guys watching it this far, and I will see you all in the next video.